The Recipe for Seduction, Part 2, Final Part. David stared at the croissant like it might explode. Julian, he said slowly, you cannot assign yourself as my personal chef. Julian waved a dismissive hand. Nonsense! You are overworked, underfed, and clearly making terrible life decisions, like turning down a woman who broke into your house to cook for you. David pinched the bridge of his nose. That's not the convincing argument you think it is. But Julian had already settled into the chair across from him, less crossed, looking perfectly at home. Let's do a trial run. 1 week. If you don't feel healthier, happier, and more in love with me, I will leave you alone. David exhaled sharply. You are insane. Julian smiled. And persistent. There was a long pause. Finally, he muttered, Fine. 1 week. Julian clapped her hands. Excellent. I will send over a meal plan, and of course, I will need a copy of your house keys. David shot out a look. Absolutely not. Julian shrugged. Suit yourself. But don't be surprised if you wake up one day and find breakfast already made. David groaned. He had a feeling he'd just made a deal with the devil. A very beautiful, charming, and highly invasive devil. Julian took her new role very seriously. By the next morning, she had already prepared an elaborate breakfast spread. Freshly baked bread, perfectly scrambled eggs, and coffee so rich it could pay school fees. The only problem, she still didn't have a key to David's house, but a locked door had never stopped her before. With a little ingenuity and a highly questionable use of her manicured nails, she managed to finesse the back door open. She tiptoed inside, balancing a tray with the grace of a woman who definitely belonged there. Just as she was setting the food down, a deep voice called through the air, Julian! She turned, still smiling, only to find David standing at the top of the stairs, shirtless, freshly showered, and holding a mug of his own coffee. His expression was a mix of exhaustion, resignation, and mild horror. Why are you in my house? He asked, as if this was not a perfectly reasonable situation. Julian gestured grandly at the table. I'm fulfilling my duties as your personal chef. I let myself in since you forgot to give me a key. David ran a hand down his face. That's called breaking and entering. Julian took a dainty sip of orange juice. Details. David sighed, already regretting his life choices. He needed to find a way to get rid of her before she started forwarding his mail to her address. David considered calling security or the police or perhaps an exorcist because Julian's persistence bordered on supernatural. But instead, he sat down, defeated, as she cheerfully pushed a plate of food in front of him. Eat, she commanded, as if he were the intruder in his own house. David eyed the scrambled eggs suspiciously. You didn't poison this, did you? Julian gasped, clutching her chest. David, how dare you? I would never. Then, after a pause, she added, unless you were seeing that woman from the other night. Then maybe. David groaned and took a bite, because at this point, resistance was pointless, and damn it, it was delicious. Julian watched him eat with the satisfaction of a woman who had definitely won. See, you need me. Who else is going to make sure you start your day with a proper meal? David chewed slowly, already sensing the trap. Julian, we agreed on a week. She beamed. Exactly. And since you clearly love my cooking, I'm extending my services indefinitely. David nearly choked on his throat. That's not how agreements work. Julian shrugged. Well, if you really want to stop me, you will have to find a way to make me. She sipped her juice, her eyes twinkling with mischief. David sighed. He had a sinking feeling that getting rid of Julian was going to be harder than getting her to stop breaking into his house. David knew he had to do something before Julian started forwarding her bank alert to his phone. But the problem was, despite her absurd invasiveness, she was growing on him. He hated to admit it, but waking up to a freshly made meals and a touch of chaos had started to feel oddly enjoyable. Still, a man had to take a stand. So, later that evening, he called her over for a serious talk. Julian arrived in her finest designer dress, expecting a proposal, a private chef contract, or at the very least, an all-expenses paid vacation. Instead, David folded his arms and said, Julian, This needs to stop. Julian gasped, clutching her non-existent pearls. Stop what? She asked, blinking innocently. David gestured vaguely around them. The breaking into my house, the surprise meals, the complete disregard for personal boundaries. Julian huffed. So dramatic. But then she saw it, that flicker in his eyes. Not anger, not annoyance, but something dangerously close to fondness. A slow smirk spread across her face. Alright, David, she said sweetly, stepping closer. If you want me to stop, say it with conviction. David opened his mouth, but no words came out. Julian grinned. Checkmate. She picked up a fork, took a bite of the pasta she had definitely not been invited to make and winked. Looks like I'm staying. David had two options. Throw Julian out and spend the rest of his life wondering what kind of disaster she'd cook up next, or to surrender to the inevitable. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Fine, he muttered. You win, but if you break into my house one more time, I'm changing all the locks. Julian gasped dramatically. David, that is so hurtful. Have I ever truly broken in, or have I just entered in a more creative way? You climbed my balcony last week. Julian waved a hand. Semantics. Then, without missing a beat, she grabbed his wrist and pulled him towards the dining table. Now, sit and made something special. David obeyed, half out of exhaustion, half out of curiosity. As Julian placed a beautifully placed dish in front of him, he frowned. This looks normal. Julian smirked. Exactly. I figured I'd give you one night without chaos. David took a bite, and then it was good. But as he chewed, he noticed Julian watching him a little too intently. He swallowed. Julian, what did you do? She batted her lashes. Oh, nothing. Just a tiny favor. David narrowed his eyes. What favor? Julian sipped her wine, looking far too pleased with herself. Well, you might have a small dinner guest arriving soon. David groaned. He had been played again. Just as David was about to demand answers, the doorbell rang. He shot Julian a suspicious glare before reluctantly getting up to answer it. The moment he opened the door, he nearly slammed it shut again. Standing there, dressed to impress, was his mother. David, my darling boy, she cooed, sweeping into the house like royalty. It's been too long. David turned slowly to Julian, who sat smugly at the dining table, swallowing her wine glass. What have you done? He hissed. Julian beamed. I thought it was time I met your family, since I'm practicing running this household now. David groaned, but it was too late. His mother was already hugging Julian. Oh, my dear, you are exactly the kind of woman my son needs. Elegant, resourceful, and with such good manners. Julian nodded gracefully, as if she hadn't trespassed multiple times. David exhaled sharply, realizing he had been outmaneuvered for the final time. His mom turned to him with a gleam in her eyes. David, you must keep this one, no. Julian smirked. Checkmate. She raised her glass to David in a silent toast. He had lost, she had won. And if he wasn't careful, he might just end up married. Julian has spent years perfecting the art of seduction through food, but nothing could have prepared her for this. David, the one man who had seen through every of her tricks, now stood before her, a devilish smirk on his face and a diamond ring in his hand. Marry me, he said smoothly, twirling the ring between his fingers. You want a rich husband, and I need to get my mother off my back. It's a win-win. Julian narrowed her eyes, studying him. She would have been thrilled. David was everything she wanted. Wealthy, powerful, and utterly out of reach of real feelings. And yet, something about this felt too easy. What's the catch? She asked, crossing her arms. David leaned in. His voice was a low murmur. No real love. No messy emotions. Just a mutually beneficial arrangement. Julian tilted her head, considering. She had spent months chasing men who were either too old, too dull, or too dense to keep up with her. Now, here was David, sharp, rich, and willing to play along. Fine, she said, slipping the ring onto her finger. But you don't dare fall in love with me. David chuckled, his gaze lingering a little too long. I should be telling you that. Julian wasted no time making their engagement the event of the century. Banana Island was drowning in whispers, fueled by the fact that she and David, who had spent months at each other's throat, were now sickening in love. Or at least, that was the illusion Julian carefully crafted. She planned elaborate public dates, wore diamonds the size of her ego, and posted soft-lit photos of their private moments, all while David played along with an infuriating ease. The man was good, almost too good. He'd pull her close at just the right moment, whisper just the right thing to make her blush, and worst of all, he was having fun. "You enjoy this too much," Julian muttered. One night after the dinner party, where he had dipped her in the middle of the toast, sending their audience into a frenzy, David smirked, swelling his wine. "Why shouldn't I? It's amusing watching you fall for your own game." Julian scoffed, ignoring the strange flutter in her chest. She wasn't falling for anything. This was business, a strategy, and yet, when she found herself cooking for him late one night unprovoked, she realized something was very, very wrong. She had fed many men, seduced them with butter and truffle oil, but this was different. David sat at the kitchen counter, watching her with a lazy smile as she plated a dish that wasn't part of any scheme. It was comfortable, too intimate, too real. As he took a bite, closing his eyes in pleasure, Julian had the sudden and horrifying realization she was losing. Julian had always known how to control a man's desires, but David, he was different. He didn't just enjoy the game, he played it back. Every time she tried to keep things transactional, he would throw in something unexpected, a lingering touch, a soft gaze, a genuine moment. It was infuriating, but nothing was worse than the night she found herself staring at him while he slept, the moonlight casting soft shadows across his face. "What are you doing, Julian? This wasn't love. It couldn't be. Love was messy. Love was dangerous. She needed to secure her position, sign the marriage contract, and move on. And yet she stayed, watching her heart pounding like she had already lost." The next morning, David made things worse. "You know," he said, sipping his coffee, "you could have woken me up instead of watching me all night." Julian choked on her tea. "Excuse me." His smirk was pure sin. "You are sleeping, darling." She hated how easily he read her. "You are delusional," she shot back, turning away. Even as she left the room, her reflection in the glass window told the truth. She looked like a woman falling in love. The wedding was perfect, the flowers were imported, the guest list was scandalously exclusive, and Julian looked like a queen in a gown that cost more than some people's entire net worth. She had done it, secured a rich husband, a life of luxury, and a future where she had never lifted a finger except to stir a pot of gourmet sauce. As she walked down the aisle, every eye on her, she kept her chin high. This was the goal, the plan. But then she saw David, waiting for her, smirking, but not in his usual cocky way. No, there was something softer in his gaze, something real, and that is when it hit her. She didn't take this to be fake anymore. She reached the altar, staring into the eyes of the man she had spent months scheming against. The priest began speaking, and she barely heard a word. Then, David leaned in, whispering just for her. "Still pretending?" Julia had stopped. For once in her life, she had no comeback, no quick-witted remark. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then, slowly, a smirk curved her lips. "Not anymore." David chuckled, shaking his head before pulling her in for a kiss so deep, so utterly real, that the crowd gasped. The game was over, and somehow, Julian had still won.